Marhaba, ahlan wa sahlan, welcome. So, in this video, we are going to be doing some vocab that has to do with speaking and culture. So, if you're in your textbook, I'm on page 86, and we're also going to be talking about forms of address. So, let's get right into it. So, that list that you have has several words in it. We're not actually going to be covering all of those in this video because many of those words are going to come up in Unit 5 and 6. So I'm just going to let them come up as we learn to write those letters. But a couple of words that I do want to point out. So remember, as we're looking at the list, we're only focusing on what's blue because this is Modern Standard Arabic. Okay, so that's what we're focusing on. The other two that are written, Shami is from the Levant, so Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and then Masri is Egyptian, and we're not learning either of those dialects, so we're only focusing on Fusha. Okay, so let's do the first one that I want to focus on here. We have done Sabah al-Khair, Sabah al-Khair, Sabah al-Khair, and I'm just going to transliterate it here because we haven't done the written form of it. Sabah al-Khair, and you're connecting these two words together. So we're saying Sabah al-Khair, the ha sound that we have. Remember, I don't have a pair of glasses, but if we took off our glasses and we were cleaning the glass, that's the sound that we're making here. Sabah al-Khair. Khair, remember, is in the back of your throat. Kha. Khair. Khair here means good. And sabah means morning. So you're wishing the person a good morning. So now, what about if it's later on in the day? This one that we have, Masa al-Khair. Masa. And the way that it's written out here, it has this apostrophe. This apostrophe is the sound of the Hamza. And remember, we covered the Hamza. Let me look at the page. We covered the Hamza in the beginning of Unit 4. So on pages 66 to 69, we talked all about the Hamza. So you should have already watched that video and done the lesson on it. So that apostrophe just represents the Hamza, which is the sound. It's the glottal stop. Masa, masa, with the at the end. Masa al-Khair. You take the sound and you simply connect it to al. Masa al-Khair. Masa al-Khair. Masa al-Khair. Masa al-Khair. So masa is evening. So khair, we just said, was good. So now you're saying good evening. Masa al-Khair. I remember when we did Sabah al-Khair, the response we did was Sabah al-Nur. Sabah al-Nur. And nur means light. And remember we said in Arab culture, we always want to one-up the other person. So if you're giving one person, you're saying good, the next person want to say, oh, okay, have a light morning, full of light. Okay, and sometimes people keep going back and forth. But the response here is the same thing, an-nur. But this time we're going to start it with this word. Masa an-nur. Masa an-nur. Masa al-Nur. Masa al-Nur. Masa al-Khair. Masa al-Nur. Masa. Okay, so good morning we've done, and now good evening, the response. Okay, so good evening and the response right here. Masa al-Khair. Masa al-Nur. So depending on the time of day that it is. Okay. The other ones that I wanted to bring up that are really good for us in this class are these three right here. Okay, this word right here is عندي, and it has this C in the beginning in the transliteration because it's the sound. And we did the sound in a couple of words that we did. So when we did the numbers in this chapter, we said أربعة. If you were to put your finger right here on your Adam's apple or in the middle of your throat, ah. Do you see this roll? There's a roll that's happening. Ah, ah. And that roll is from the contraction of your vocal cords. You obviously don't want to choke yourself, but there's a slight contraction as that sound is moving. That is the sound of the ayn, which we're going to cover in a couple of chapters. So don't worry about what it looks like and whatnot, but do worry about the sound here for this word. This word is عندي. So it's the R sound and the N sound after it. عندي. If I was to say it without that, it'd be indie. But we want to say عندي. It's happening right here at the bottom. Okay, bottom of the throat. So عندي means I have. Okay, عندي, I have. A great thing or a word that you want to know is the word su'al. This apostrophe here is that hamza, so it's the sound. Su'al. Su'al means question. So if I say عندي سؤال, I have a question. Okay. So now if you have a question, you can say عندي سؤال. عندي سؤال. عندي سؤال. I have a question. عندي سؤال. If you don't have a question, we use the word ليس, which is a negation. It means not. So you just pack it on right in front of that sentence. ليس عندي سؤال, meaning I don't have a question. عندي سؤال, I have a question. ليس عندي سؤال. So now you're going to repeat after me. عندي سؤال. عندي سؤال. And now if you don't have a question, ليس عندي سؤال. ليس عندي سؤال. So now you can use that. Sorry, we have some rude background noise. ليس عندي. So if you don't have a question, ليس عندي, I don't have a question. ليس عندي سؤال. So notice the order, the structure of the sentence is a little bit different than English, right? It's opposite to what English is. So we'll talk more about sentence structure as we start writing more of these kind of sentences, right? Noticing that when you say I don't have, the don't part comes first, right? ليس عندي. Don't. عندي, I have questions. So the order is very different than English. So we will talk more about that when we do more of sentence structure. But for now, just practice saying them. Okay, so we'll do it from the top here. Change the color. Okay, the first one. مساء الخير. مساء الخير. The response. مساء النور. مساء النور. I have. عندي. عندي. I don't have. ليس عندي. ليس عندي. Question. سؤال. سؤال. Now notice we're using عندي with سؤال, I have a question, but you could use it with anything. We've done plenty of words. We could say عندي بيت, I have a house. Okay. You could say عندي أخ, I have a brother. We did that word this chapter. عندي أخت, I have a sister. And those words are also, if you look right above here in your textbook, those words are listed there. But we did those words as written vocab words because now we know the hamza. So عندي أخ, I have a brother. عندي أخت, I have a sister. So any of the nouns that we've done, عندي توت, I have berries. عندي جيب, I have a pocket. Anything that you have or you don't have with a noun, you can now use that using the word عندي. And if you don't have it, let's say I want to say I don't have a brother, which I don't, then I would say ليس عندي أخ. I don't have, and then put the noun afterwards. ليس عندي أخ. So now you're going to practice on your own, saying things you have or you don't have, and then greeting people in the evening. Forms of address. This has to do with ثقافة. ثقافة is culture. Okay. So in in Arab culture, it is very important how you address someone, and show respect to the person that you are addressing. Okay? So the first thing to know is when you want to say you in a polite way, or it's almost like saying excuse me, or you're trying to get someone's attention. We use this word right here, which is hadratak. And it's written right here. And I'm not going to focus too much on this word in this lesson because it's going to come up in Unit 6, I believe. Okay, so it will come up. There's a capital D there because the sound is a B. It's a heavy D sound. We'll come to that. So if you're struggling with that sound, that's okay. It's because we haven't done the lesson on that sound. Okay? Hadratak. Okay? Hadratak. Okay? Hadratak. 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 Okay. So hadratak. Hadratak is just when you're getting someone's attention. And it just means, literally it means your presence. You're asking for that person to give you their attention. So hadratak. And for the feminine, hadratik. Notice there's a kasra here. Okay? Hadratak. Hadratik. Okay. So for instance, you could, let's say you're at the store and you want to ask the person who's working there a question. You could say, حضرتك عندي سؤال. Okay, so it would work like that. If it's a woman, حضرتك عندي سؤال. So now let's talk about the actual specific forms. So the first one that we have is doctor, which is the same in English. Doctor or doctora. Doctor, this is the masculine, or doctora, the feminine. Okay. Doctor, doctora, doctor, doctora. So you're going to use this obviously for someone who's a doctor, right? An academic professional has a PhD or is a medical doctor, doctor. Now the thing that's important and that's different from English is this right here. Is that when you're using a title to address someone, you follow it by their first name or their full name. You don't use their last name. So if someone's name, for instance, was George Habib. Okay, I just made up a name. You would call him Dr. George Habib, or you would say Dr. George. Right, so you'd use that person's first name or their full name. You don't use their last name. Okay, which is why when I put my emails out to you guys, what do I refer to myself? I say Professor Tazeen or Professor T. Even though in American culture you would have used my last name, right? But in Arab culture we're using the first name. Okay. So if I was a doctor, you would say Doctora Tazeen. You'd use my first name. Or if you want to address me completely, you would say Doctora Tazeen Ayoub. Okay. So this is going to be when you're referring to doctors, academic professionals. If you're referring to someone who is not a doctor, doesn't have a PhD, but they are educated, they are working at a business, or they're a teacher, you use the word ustad. Ustad. And notice ustad ends with the letter dal. Ustad. So pronounce the dal at the end. Ustad. It also says ustaz, but that's dialect. So we're not going to use the dialect. If you were to watch the dialect videos that are in the Al-Kitab website, they say ustaz. Okay? But we're not going to say ustaz. We're going to say ustad and ustadha for the feminine. Pronounce with the a at the end for the feminine. Ustad, ustadha. So what would you refer to me as? Ustadha Tazeen. Ustadha Tazeen. Okay. So you'd use ustad because I am a professor. I'm your instructor. Okay. You would use ustad if you're in a business setting and you're talking to someone who works at, a fellow person who works at the company. Ustad literally means professor, but it can be used for anyone who's educated, anyone who's sort of an employee somewhere or a teacher, so on and so forth. Okay. Another form that you can use is Sayyid. Sayyid, and the feminine Sayyida. Do you notice here? all of the feminine forms just add a to the end. That's the feminine marker, which we will be learning in the next chapter. Sayyida. Sayyid. Sayyida. Sayyid and Sayyida literally is just Mr. or Mrs. Okay? Or you could think of it as sir and ma'am. Equivalent. Okay? It's used in more formal situations. You're referring to someone who maybe you don't know what their professional title is. Maybe they don't have a professional title. Maybe it's not a context of, maybe it's not a professional context. Maybe it's just, you're just seeing someone in passing and you want to show respect. So Mr. and Mrs. or Sir and Ma'am. So Sayyid, Sayyida. Okay. Sayyid Frank. Sayyid Ahmed. Sayyida Fatima. Sayyida Sarah. Okay, so using their first name. Then another form that you have that you can use. So these are pretty much more formal. These first three we've talked about. Then you have a couple of forms that can be used for women. You have madame, which, you know, as we know the word madam, right? Madame. And that is when you're referring to an older woman or a married woman. So a lot of times in Arab culture, whether a woman is married or not tends to be important, though culturally speaking now it's not as important. But we still have those terms in the language. So madame would be someone who's usually older or someone who is older and married. And then if you want to refer to a woman who is a young woman, so maybe she's a teenager, right? And you don't want to call her a child, but you do want to refer to her as a woman because she is a growing woman. We can say Anisa. And Anisa can also be used for a young woman who is unmarried. So let's say not just high school, someone's in college, for instance, right? You could use Anisa. So these two have more to do with age. And then these three right here have more to do with status and respect. Okay. Now the other thing that we want to mention here is ya, which I did mention in one of the first lessons that we did. Ya is when you're referring to someone. So if I was talking to you, ya Fatima, ya Muhammad, ya Layla, ya Sarah, right? So we use ya when you're talking to someone. You use the same thing when you do a form of address. Ya Dr. George. Ya Ustada Tazeen. Ya Sayyid Ahmed. So ya is used in the beginning when you're referring to that person. So when you're addressing someone and you're talking to them, use ya because it shows that you're directing your attention to them. Obviously, if you're talking about them, you're telling someone who this is, you're not going to say ya because you're not looking at them and addressing them directly. Okay, so ya is when you're addressing someone directly. So let's look at some examples. I put up a couple of examples here, and let's look at what these people would call each other. So let's call this one. What would this gentleman call this woman? She's obviously a doctor. Ya doctora. Ya doctora, and whatever her name is. Ya doctora Sally. What would she refer to him? Let's say she doesn't know what his profession is. Let's say she doesn't know she doesn't know anything about his background. What would be the safest thing to call him? Sayyid. Could call him Sayyid and whatever his name is. Okay? If out of respect, if you don't know a person's profession but you still want to show respect to someone, call them Ustad. You could do that too. Call them Ustad to show respect to someone, regardless of whatever the person's profession is. If he's also a doctor, then Doctor. Okay, how about this situation? We have an older woman. What would this young lady call this older woman? Madame. What would she call her? What would the older lady call this younger woman? Anisa. Okay, how about here? Looks like two professionals are next to each other. What can they call each other? Ustad. Good. They can both call each other Ustad. If they want to call each other Sayyid, they can do that too. But Ustad would be more respectful. Okay, how about in this situation? What are all of these children going to call this woman? Ustada, obviously, because she's their teacher. Ustada. And then for each of these, because they're so young, she's just going to call them by their name directly. Okay, how about here, in this last situation? What will this woman call the doctor? Doctor. And what is he going to call her? Let's assume that maybe she's a little bit older. Madame. Good. If he wants to say Mrs., he could say Sayyida. If he wants to show more respect, he could call her Ustada. If she's also a doctor, he could call her Doctora. So notice how all of these really, for some situations, you could use any number. It's a number of them. It's just whatever floats your boat. Okay? They're all, however, respectful. So the bottom line here with this exercise of using forms of address within culture is that it has to do with showing respect. So with whoever it is that you're talking to show respect by giving them a title. Okay, so that's what this is. So what I would recommend is practice using ya and forms of address. So people that you know, people in your family, your friends, your community, think of what you would say to them. How would you address them?